The inspector nodded. I know. I checked your permits before I came. Everything looks fine, but I still have to respond to complaints. Just wanted to let you know someone's watching. He didn't have to say who had filed the complaint. Rachel knew. Over the next week, 2 more inspectors showed up for various complaints. One about excessive dust, another about construction materials being stored improperly, which wasn't even true. Mike had everything neatly organized and covered with tarps. Each time the inspectors found nothing wrong, but each time Rachel felt more anxious. The Petersons stopped acknowledging her entirely. When she waved, they looked right through her. Robert started coming outside whenever the construction crew was working, standing on his property line and staring at them, arms crossed. It was clearly meant to be intimidating, and honestly, it kind of worked. Then came the letter from their attorney. Rachel's hands shook as she opened it. The legal letterhead alone was enough to make her heart race. The letter claimed that according to a recent survey the Petersons had commissioned, Rachel's new deck was encroaching on their property by 3 feet. They demanded she halt construction immediately and remove any structures on their land. Rachel felt sick. She immediately called the surveyor she'd used when she bought the property. He came out the next day and remeasured everything. You're fine, he assured her. Your deck is completely on your property. You've got at least 5 feet of clearance from the property line. Whoever they hired either made a mistake or they're lying. Can you put that in writing? Rachel asked. Absolutely. She sent the Petersons' lawyer a copy of her survey along with a firm letter from her own attorney, which cost her $500 she hadn't budgeted for. She thought that would be the end of it. She was wrong. 2 days later, a construction crew arrived at the Peterson property. Rachel watched from her window as they began building a fence. Not just any fence, a solid wooden privacy fence, 8 feet tall, positioned right along the property line. It blocked her view of about half the lake. Rachel ran outside. What are you doing? Robert was standing there supervising the work. He smiled at her, but there was no warmth in it. Building a fence on our property. Is there a problem? That fence blocks my view, Rachel said, trying to keep her voice steady. It's on our land, Robert replied. We can build whatever we want on our own property. I'm sure you understand that, given your recent construction project. Rachel felt tears prick her eyes, but she refused to cry in front of him. She went back inside and called the county planning office. They confirmed what she already knew. The Petersons were within their rights to build the fence on their property line. The harassment continued in small, constant ways. The Petersons started parking their boat trailer in a way that made it difficult for Rachel to back out of her driveway. They installed bright security lights that shone directly into her bedroom window at night. Helen began spreading rumors at the lake community meetings. Rachel found out about the rumors from Margaret, one of the other neighbors who lived 3 houses down. Margaret stopped by one afternoon looking uncomfortable. I don't know if I should tell you this, Margaret said, but I thought you should know what people are saying. Helen's been telling everyone that you're difficult to deal with, that you refuse to compromise on your construction plans, that you're not a good fit for the community. That's not true, Rachel protested. I got all my permits, I followed all the rules. She's the one who started this whole thing. Margaret looked sympathetic but also wary. I believe you, but the Petersons have been here for 15 years. They have a lot of influence, people trust them. Rachel felt completely isolated. She'd moved to the lake dreaming of a peaceful life, and instead, she'd walked into some kind of nightmare. She couldn't understand what she'd done wrong. Building a deck was normal. Millions of homeowners did it every year. Why had it triggered such an extreme reaction? She tried to ignore the harassment and focus on finishing her deck. Mike and his crew worked as quickly as they could, all of them uncomfortable with Robert's constant surveillance and Helen's occasional appearances to take photos of their work, muttering about violations. Finally, after 3 weeks instead of the planned 2, the deck was finished. It was beautiful. Exactly what Rachel had envisioned. She should have been thrilled, but instead she felt exhausted and anxious. The Petersons had sucked all the joy out of it. She thought maybe with the construction done things would calm down. Maybe the Petersons would lose interest and they could all move on. She was wrong again. A week after the deck was completed, Rachel received a formal citation from the county. The Petersons had filed a complaint that her new deck was affecting watershed drainage and potentially polluting the lake. An environmental inspector would need to come assess the situation. Rachel wanted to scream. The inspection cost her $300, and of course they found nothing wrong. Her contractor had installed proper drainage exactly as required by the permits, but the damage was done. Every complaint, every inspection, every legal letter cost her money and stress. Her freelance work was suffering because she was constantly distracted and anxious. She wasn't sleeping well. She'd lost weight. The cottage that was supposed to be her dream had become a source of constant dread. And the worst part? She was beginning to realize this wasn't random harassment. This felt calculated, systematic, like the Petersons had done this before and knew exactly how to make someone's life miserable while staying just inside the bounds of legal behavior. Late one night, unable to sleep, Rachel sat on her new deck in the darkness. The fence blocked her view of the Peterson property, but she could see the rest of the lake. It was beautiful in the moonlight, peaceful and still. This was what she'd worked so hard for. She wasn't going to let them take it from her, but she had no idea how to fight back. The Petersons had money, influence, and time. Rachel had student loans, a mortgage, and a career that required her focus. She felt completely outmatched. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to discover something that would change everything. Sometimes when people push you hard enough, you have two choices: break or push back harder. Rachel was done breaking. Things got worse before they got better. Much worse. About a month after the deck was finished, Rachel started noticing strange things happening around her property. Her mailbox was knocked over twice in 1 week. Someone scattered nails across her driveway and she got a flat tire before she noticed them. Her garden hose was cut. Small things, but constant things. Things that could technically be blamed on random vandalism or bad luck, but Rachel knew better. She installed a security camera, which immediately prompted a complaint from the Petersons that she was invading their privacy. Never mind that the camera only covered her own property. Their lawyer sent another letter demanding she remove it. Rachel's lawyer advised her to keep it up as long as it only showed her property, which it did. The worst incident came on a Tuesday morning. Rachel woke up to find 2 police officers at her door. Her stomach dropped. "What now?" "Ma'am, we received a report that you threatened your neighbors," one of the officers said. He looked young and uncomfortable. "What?" Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. "That's absolutely not true. I haven't even spoken to them in weeks." "The report says you confronted them yesterday evening and made threatening statements." "Yesterday evening I was on a video call with a client from 6 until almost 9. I have the call records. I never left my house." The officers exchanged glances. "Can you show us those records?" Rachel pulled up her work calendar and her video conferencing history on her laptop. The timeline didn't match the Petersons' claim at all. The officers took notes and thanked her for her cooperation. "For what it's worth," the younger officer said quietly as they were leaving, "we've had several calls from this address. So far, none of them have panned out. But we still have to respond to every complaint." After they left, Rachel sat on her couch and cried. This wasn't just harassment anymore. The Petersons were trying to give her a criminal record. They were trying to paint her as dangerous, unstable. If she got arrested, even if the charges were dropped later, it would affect her ability to get work. Her clients trusted her with their websites, their businesses. A criminal record would destroy her reputation. That's when something clicked in Rachel's mind. Reputation. That's what this was really about. The Petersons were systematically destroying her reputation in the community, with the county offices, even with law enforcement, and they were doing it so carefully that they never quite crossed the line into anything clearly illegal. She thought about Margaret's warning that the Petersons had influence. She thought about how all her neighbors seemed to defer to them. She thought about the careful way they'd escalated things, always making it look like Rachel was the problem. This wasn't their first time doing this. It couldn't be. They were too good at it. Rachel opened her laptop and started searching. She began with property records for the Clearwater Lake area, looking at ownership history. The Peterson property was huge. much bigger than most of the other lots. That was interesting. How had they ended up with so much land? She dug deeper into the county records, and there it was. 15 years ago, the Petersons had owned just the Mai, in lot where their house sat, but 8 years ago they'd purchased the adjacent property, and 12 years ago they'd purchased the property on their other side. Rachel pulled up the sales records. Both properties had sold for significantly below market value. That was strange. Lakefront property was valuable. Why would anyone sell cheap? She started searching for the previous owners' names online. The first one, a woman named Dorothy Chen, had a sparse digital footprint, but Rachel found an old forum post from about 9 years ago. Dorothy had written about her nightmare neighbors on a homeowners forum, talking about constant harassment and legal threats that had forced her to sell her lake house. Rachel's hands were shaking as she typed. She found the second previous owner, a man named James Wheeler, mentioned in a local newspaper article from 13 years ago about a neighborhood dispute at Clearwater Lake. The article was brief and didn't give many details, but it mentioned ongoing tensions and property disagreements. This was it. This was the pattern. The Petersons didn't just want Rachel gone. They wanted her property. They'd done this before at least twice, maybe more. They'd harass their neighbors until those neighbors couldn't take it anymore and sold their properties cheap. Then the Petersons would buy the land and expand their little empire. Rachel felt angry, but she also felt something else. Relief. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't overreacting. This was real and it was deliberate, and most importantly, she now knew their game plan. But knowing wasn't enough. She needed proof. She needed to find those previous owners and get them to talk about what had happened to them. And she needed to figure out if the Petersons had done anything actually illegal, not just cruel. She spent the next 2 weeks obsessively researching. She hired a private investigator, a retired police detective named Frank who specialized in property disputes. It cost her $2,000 she really couldn't afford, but she felt like she didn't have a choice. She was fighting for her home, her peace of mind, her future. Frank was thorough. Within a week, he'd tracked down both Dorothy Chen and James Wheeler. Both were willing to talk, and both had stories that sounded horrifyingly familiar to Rachel's experience. False complaints, legal harassment, attempts to damage their reputations. Both had eventually sold to the Petersons just to escape the constant stress. "They're bullies," Dorothy told Rachel over the phone. Her voice still held anger even after all these years. "Rich bullies who figured out that if you have enough money for lawyers and enough time to be persistent, you can make someone's life absolutely miserable while staying just barely on the right side of the law." But Frank found something else too. Something Rachel hadn't even thought to look for. He discovered that the Petersons' property had several structures that had never been permitted. A large storage shed, an extension to their dock, a covered patio area. In their arrogance and their confidence that no one would challenge them, they'd simply built what they wanted without going through proper channels. More importantly, Frank found evidence that the Petersons had altered a natural stream that ran through their property. They'd redirected it to feed their extensive lawn irrigation system. The stream was protected under state environmental law. Diverting it was illegal. "This is good," Frank said when he showed Rachel his findings. "Really good. Environmental violations are taken seriously, and if you can prove they did it without permits, that's even better." Rachel also learned through Frank's investigation that the Petersons' dock extended beyond their property boundary into public waterway. That was another violation. They'd basically stolen public space for their private use. For the first time in months, Rachel felt hope. But she also felt scared. The Petersons had money and connections. She was one person, barely scraping by financially after all the legal fees and harassment. Could she really take them on? She thought about Dorothy and James forced out of homes they'd loved. She thought about the next person who might buy her cottage if she gave up and sold, walking into the same nightmare she'd been living. She thought about the 12 years she'd worked and saved to make her dream come true. She made a decision. She was going to fight, not with harassment or games, but with facts and law. She was going to do exactly what the Petersons had been doing to her, but with one crucial difference. Everything she did would be completely legal and completely justified. She started by documenting everything. Every interaction, every incident, every complaint the Petersons filed against her. She organized it all chronologically with dates, times, and evidence. She collected statements from Dorothy and James about their experiences. She had Frank's investigation report with photos and documentation of all the Petersons' violations. Then she did something that felt both terrifying and empowering. She filed official complaints with the county environmental office about the stream diversion and the unpermitted structures. She filed complaints about the dock extension into public water. She sent copies of everything to the State Environmental Protection Agency. She wasn't harassing them. She was simply reporting actual violations. If the Petersons had followed the rules, there would be nothing to report. But they hadn't followed the rules. They'd assumed their money and influence made them untouchable. Rachel was about to teach them that nobody's untouchable. The wheels of justice might turn slowly, but when they turned, they were thorough. And she was just getting started. The first response came faster than Rachel expected. Just 3 days after she filed her environmental complaints, an inspector from the county showed up at the Peterson property. Rachel watched from her window as a man in a county vest walked around their property with a clipboard, taking photos and measurements. She saw Robert come out of the house, clearly surprised and not happy. He stood talking to the inspector for a long time, making gestures toward his property. The inspector just kept taking notes and photos. When Helen came out too, she looked even more agitated than Robert. Rachel couldn't hear what was being said, but she could read their body language. They were angry and probably demanding to know who had filed the complaint. The inspector spent over 2 hours examining their property. When he finally left, Robert stood in his driveway staring at Rachel's cottage. She let him stare. She had nothing to hide. Everything she'd done was legal and justified. 2 days later, the State Environmental Agency sent their own inspector. This one was even more thorough. He spent time examining the stream, taking water samples, documenting the diversion system the Petersons had built. He measured their dock extension into the public waterway. He examined every unpermitted structure. Rachel kept working, kept living her life, but she checked the county website obsessively for updates. She knew that environmental violations could take weeks or even months to process. She had to be patient. In the meantime, she moved forward with the other part of her plan. With Frank's help and her attorney's guidance, she filed a civil lawsuit against the Petersons for harassment. She included Dorothy and James as witnesses. The lawsuit detailed every incident, every false complaint, every act of intimidation. It showed the pattern of behavior and connected it to their previous victims. Her attorney warned her that civil cases could take a long time and get expensive. Rachel knew she was taking a risk. If she lost, she could be buried in legal debt. But if she won, she'd get compensation for all the stress and money their harassment had cost her. More importantly, she'd have a legal record of their behavior. The Petersons were served with the lawsuit papers on a Thursday morning. Rachel wasn't there to see it, but Margaret called her later that day. "I don't know what you did," Margaret said, "but Helen was at the community mailbox ranting about you to anyone who would listen. She seemed genuinely shocked that you'd fight back." "I'm just defending myself," Rachel said, "with documentation and facts." "Well, be careful," Margaret warned. "They're not going to take this lying down." Margaret was right. The Petersons' attorney immediately filed a countersuit claiming defamation and harassment against Rachel. They claimed she was the one making their lives difficult, that her lawsuit was baseless and meant to damage their reputation. Rachel's attorney had expected this. "It's a standard intimidation tactic," he explained. "They're trying to scare you into dropping your suit. But we have documented evidence. They have nothing but their word." The legal battle ramped up, but something else was happening that the Petersons couldn't control. The county was taking the environmental violation seriously, very seriously. Rachel received a notice that she was required to attend a county hearing about watershed protection. So were the Petersons. When she arrived at the county building, she saw Robert and Helen with their attorney looking grim. There were also several other people there, including representatives from the State Environmental Agency and the local Water Conservation Board. The hearing lasted 3 hours. The county presented all the findings from their inspections. The Petersons' attorney tried to argue that the stream diversion was minor and had been there for years, as if that made it okay. He claimed the dock extension was a surveying error. He had explanations for every violation, but the environmental inspector had done his homework. He showed photos comparing the natural stream path to the current, diverted path. He presented documentation showing that the Petersons had never applied for any water use permits. He showed how their dock clearly extended beyond their property markers into public water space. "These aren't minor violations," the inspector stated. "This stream feeds directly into Clearwater Lake. Any diversion affects the entire watershed, and the dock extension is using public resources for private benefit." The hearing officer, a serious woman in her 50s, listened to everything carefully. At the end, she announced that she would review all the evidence and issue a decision within 30 days. Rachel left feeling both hopeful and nervous. She'd set things in motion, but she couldn't control the outcome. While waiting for the hearing decision, Frank continued investigating. He was thorough and he loved a good challenge. He discovered something else interesting. The Petersons had claimed certain tax exemptions for agricultural use on part of their property, but there was no actual agricultural activity happening. That was tax fraud. Frank also found that when Robert had sold his car dealerships 15 years ago, there had been several customer lawsuits alleging fraud and deceptive practices. The cases had been settled out of court, which meant they didn't show up on standard background checks. But they showed a pattern of unethical behavior. "These people have been gaming the system their whole lives," Frank told Rachel. "They're used to getting away with things because they have money and most people don't want to fight back. You're probably the first person who's actually stood up to them with facts and documentation." Rachel shared all of Frank's findings with her attorney, who incorporated them into the ongoing lawsuit. Each piece of evidence added to the picture of who the Petersons really were and how they operated. About 3 weeks after the hearing, Rachel got a call from her attorney. "You're going to want to sit down for this," he said. She could hear the satisfaction in his voice. The county just issued their decision. The Petersons have been cited for multiple environmental violations. They're being fined $50,000 for the stream diversion. They have to restore the stream to its natural path within 60 days, which is going to cost them a fortune. They're fined another $30,000 for the unpermitted structures, and they have to either get retroactive permits or remove the structures. And they have to remove the dock extension immediately. Rachel felt dizzy. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. And it gets better. Because they diverted a protected stream, the state environmental agency is also investigating. They could face additional state fines. Plus, I got a call from the county tax assessor's office. Someone tipped them off about the fraudulent agricultural exemption. They're auditing the Petersons' property taxes for the last 7 years." Rachel hadn't even reported the tax issue. Frank must have made an anonymous call. She should probably have felt bad about that, but she didn't. The Petersons had tried to destroy her life over a deck. They deserved every bit of scrutiny they were getting. Over the next few weeks, the situation continued to develop. The local newspaper ran a story about the environmental violations. It wasn't a big article, just a few paragraphs in the local section, but it named the Petersons and detailed the fines. In a small lakefront community, that was huge news. Rachel started noticing a shift in how other neighbors treated her. People who had been cool toward her, clearly influenced by Helen's rumors, started warming up again. A few even apologized for believing the Petersons' version of events without hearing her side. "We should have known something was wrong," Margaret told her over coffee one afternoon. Looking back, it was strange how much they seemed to care about every little thing you did. Normal neighbors don't act like that. But the Petersons weren't done fighting. They filed appeals on the environmental citations. They hired engineers to argue that the stream restoration wasn't necessary. They fought every single finding. Their attorney sent Rachel's attorney a settlement offer. They would drop their countersuit and leave Rachel alone if she dropped her harassment lawsuit. They would not admit any wrongdoing, but they would pay her $20,000. Rachel's attorney recommended she consider it. $20,000 would cover your legal fees and then some, and you'd get them out of your life. Rachel thought about it. $20,000 would be life-changing for her. She could pay off her credit cards, fix her car, have a safety net. But she thought about Dorothy and James. She thought about the next person who might move to Clearwater Lake and end up as the Petersons' target. "No," she said. "I want this on the record. I want a legal judgment that shows what they did." "Money's not enough." Her attorney smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." The civil case moved toward trial. But as the date approached, Rachel noticed something. The Petersons' property looked different. There were construction crews there, but not building anything. They were removing things, tearing down the unpermitted structures, digging up the stream diversion system. Rachel watched the restoration work with satisfaction. Every day she could see progress. The stream was being returned to its natural path. The illegal dock extension was cut off. The sight of it felt like justice, slow and steady but very real. She didn't know it yet, but the financial pressure was building on the Petersons in ways she couldn't see. The fines, the legal fees, the cost of compliance work, the tax audit findings, all of it adding up. They'd spent their whole lives believing money made them untouchable. They were about to learn that money runs out when you're fighting on every front at once. The breaking point came on a gray morning in early March, almost exactly 1 year after Rachel had moved to Clearwater Lake. She was drinking coffee on her deck, watching the mist rise off the water, when she saw a silver sedan pull into the Petersons' driveway. A woman in business clothes got out, along with a man carrying what looked like official documents. Rachel didn't think much of it at first. The Petersons had various professionals coming and going constantly these days, dealing with all their violations and legal issues. But there was something different about the way Robert answered the door. Even from a distance, Rachel could see his shoulders slump. A few hours later, Margaret called. She was breathless with news. "Did you hear? The Petersons are selling their house. There's already a for sale sign up." Rachel set down her coffee carefully. "Are you sure?" "I just drove by. The sign went up this morning. It's with that fancy real estate company that handles all the high-end properties." Rachel felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, certainly. Satisfaction, definitely. But also something like sadness. She'd never wanted to destroy anyone. She just wanted to live peacefully in her own home. Over the next few days, the story came together. Frank still had some contacts in the area, and information flowed his way. The Petersons were facing financial pressure from multiple directions. The environmental fines alone totaled $80,000. The stream restoration had cost them close to $70,000. The tax audit had found they owed back taxes and penalties of over $40,000. Their legal fees from fighting everything were astronomical, but the real breaking point had been the civil lawsuit. Rachel's attorney had built an incredibly strong case with all the documentation, the witness statements from Dorothy and James, the pattern of behavior. The Petersons' attorney had apparently advised them that they were likely to lose and lose big. A judgment against them could be $200,000 or more when you added up compensatory damages, punitive damages, and Rachel's legal fees. They couldn't afford it all. For the first time in their lives, Robert and Helen Peterson had run out of money and options. The house sold faster than anyone expected. Less than 6 weeks after it was listed, the sign changed to under contract. Rachel learned through the neighborhood gossip that it had sold for below asking price. The Petersons needed cash quickly and couldn't afford to wait for the perfect buyer. Once the sale was in contract, the Petersons' attorney contacted Rachel's attorney with a new settlement offer. They would pay Rachel $75,000, drop all their counterclaims, and sign a statement admitting to the harassment. In exchange, Rachel would agree to drop her lawsuit. "This is a good offer," Rachel's attorney told her. "Better than we'd likely get at trial, actually. And you get the admission of wrongdoing, which is rare." Rachel agreed to the settlement. The money would change her life. She could pay off all her debts, cover her legal fees, and still have a substantial amount left for savings. But more than the money, she valued the written admission. It would help Dorothy and James get closure. It might even help other people in the future who found themselves targeted by bullies with money. The closing happened on a Thursday afternoon. Rachel signed the settlement papers in her attorney's office. The Petersons weren't there, which was probably best for everyone. Their attorney looked tired and not particularly happy to be representing them. When Rachel got home that evening, she noticed the moving trucks at the Peterson property. She watched from her window as furniture was loaded, boxes carried out. Helen looked smaller somehow, diminished. Robert kept his head down, not looking at any of the neighbors who had gathered to watch. By Saturday, they were gone. The house stood empty, waiting for the new owners. Rachel heard they were moving to Florida, starting over somewhere new where nobody knew their history. The following Monday, Rachel got up early and sat on her deck with her coffee, just like she had every morning. But this time it felt different. The spite fence the Petersons had built was still there, but the new owners had already contacted her about removing it. They wanted to be good neighbors, they'd said when they introduced themselves. They had no interest in fence wars or property disputes. Rachel looked out at the lake, at the morning light making the water shimmer gold and pink. Her cottage was finally truly hers, Not just legally, but emotionally. She'd fought for it and won. But Rachel didn't stop there. She'd learned too much about how bullies operated and how many people suffered in silence. She started a blog called Property Rights Defense, where she shared her story and offered advice to others facing similar situations. She detailed exactly how she'd documented everything, how she'd found violations, how she'd built her case. The response was overwhelming. Within a month, she was getting emails from dozens of people who were dealing with nightmare neighbors. She couldn't help everyone personally, but she could share what she'd learned. She created guides on how to properly document harassment, how to find property violations, how to build a legal case. She even created a network connecting people with investigators like Frank, who specialized in these kinds of cases. Dorothy and James both reached out after the settlement was finalized. They wanted to thank Rachel for doing what they wished they'd done. Rachel split a portion of her settlement with them. They'd suffered too, and they'd helped her by being willing to testify. It seemed only fair. "You gave us closure," Dorothy told her during a phone call. "For years, I felt like such a failure for letting them push me out. Now I know it wasn't my fault. They were professional bullies and you beat them at their own game." The local newspaper ran a longer story about the case after the settlement became public record. It detailed the Petersons' pattern of behavior, the violations they'd committed, and how one person had successfully stood up to them. Other former neighbors came forward with their own stories of Peterson harassment. It turned out Dorothy and James weren't the only ones, just the only ones who'd owned adjacent properties. The story got picked up by a few regional news outlets. Suddenly, Rachel was getting interview requests. She did a few of them, always emphasizing the same points. Document everything. Know your rights. Don't be afraid to use the system that's designed to protect people. Life at Clearwater Lake settled into a peaceful routine. The new neighbors, the Changs, were wonderful. They removed the spite fence and planted native flowers along the property line instead. They invited Rachel over for dinner. They talked about maybe building a shared fire pit area between their properties where both families could gather. This was what Rachel had dreamed of when she'd saved for 12 years to buy her cottage, community, peace, beauty. She'd had to fight for it, harder than she'd ever expected, but she'd won. Sometimes in the evenings, Rachel would sit on her deck and think about everything that had happened. The fear she'd felt when the harassment started. The despair when it seemed like the Petersons would win. The determination that had kept her going when giving up would have been easier. She'd learned something important through the whole ordeal. Bullies, whether schoolyard bullies or wealthy retired bullies, rely on their victims being too scared or too tired to fight back. They count on people not knowing their rights or not having the resources to defend themselves. But when someone stands up with facts, documentation, and determination, bullies often crumble faster than anyone expects. Rachel's blog continued to grow. She started doing consulting work, helping people strategize their responses to property harassment. It became a side business that brought in extra income and gave her a sense of purpose. She was turning her worst experience into something that helped others. A year after the Petersons left, Rachel hosted a gathering at her cottage for everyone who'd supported her during the fight. Margaret came, and the Changs and a few other neighbors. They grilled burgers, sat on Rachel's deck, and watched the sunset over the lake. "You know what I appreciate most about you?" Margaret said as the sky turned orange and purple. "You could have become bitter. You could have let them poison this place for you. Instead, you fought back and then you let it go. You didn't become what they were," Rachel smiled. It was true. She'd felt anger, certainly, lots of it, but she'd channeled it into action, not into becoming another bully herself. She'd used the law, used facts, used patience. She'd fought fire with water, steady and persistent, until the flames went out. 2 years later, Rachel was still at Clearwater Lake. Her cottage had been renovated bit by bit. The deck was weathering beautifully. Her garden was thriving. Her web design business was better than ever. And her property rights blog had helped dozens of people successfully defend against neighbor harassment. Sometimes she got letters from people thanking her. People who'd been inspired by her story to stand up for themselves. People who'd won their own battles against bullies using the strategies she'd shared. She kept all the letters in a box under her bed. On hard days, when work was stressful or life felt overwhelming, she'd read through a few of them. They reminded her that she'd done something important. She'd proved that ordinary people could stand up to those with more money and more power and win, as long as they were smart about it and persistent. Rachel had come to Clearwater Lake looking for peace and a place to call home. She'd found both, but not in the way she'd expected. She'd had to fight for them, defend them, prove she deserved them. And in doing so, she'd discovered a strength she didn't know she had. Her cottage wasn't just a house anymore. It was a symbol of what happens when someone decides that enough is enough, that they won't be pushed around, that they'll stand their ground no matter what. It was a reminder that justice might move slowly, but it does move, and sometimes the underdog wins. As Rachel sat on her deck that evening, watching the stars come out over the lake, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Complete peace. Not the peace of never having faced conflict, but the deeper peace that comes from facing it and coming through stronger on the other side. The lake was beautiful. Her home was safe, and the Petersons were just a bad memory, fading a little more with each passing season. Rachel had won not just a legal battle, but something more important. She'd won back her dream, and she'd learned that dreams are worth fighting for even when the fight seems impossible. She'd never forget what they'd tried to do to her, but she'd also never forget that she'd survived it, fought back, and built something good from something terrible. That was the real victory. Not destroying them, but refusing to be destroyed. Not seeking revenge, but seeking justice. Not becoming bitter, but becoming stronger. Rachel raised her coffee mug in a silent toast to herself, to everyone who'd helped her, and to everyone still fighting their own battles against bullies. Then she settled back in her chair and watched the moonlight dance across the water of her lake, in front of her cottage, on her property, in the peaceful life she'd earned.